My boyfriend called me ugly in front of his friends, dumped me and stuck me with the bill. As he walked away, he loudly said, "A girl like you should be grateful I even dated you. If you had asked me 6 months ago, I would have told you Ryan was the one." We had been together for 2 years, built a solid routine, and even started talking about moving in together. I met his family, he met mine, and everything seemed to be heading in the right direction. Sure, he had his quirks, opinionated, a bit blunt, but I saw it as part of his personality. I believed that love was about accepting someone, flaws and all. Looking back, I realized those quirks were warning signs. His comments about my appearance were constant and subtle, but always critical. "That dress makes you look boxy. Your hair looked better before. You should try wearing more makeup." He framed it as honesty, and I convinced myself he was just helping me be my best self. I had no idea I was slowly losing pieces of myself to meet his impossible standards. It wasn't just my looks. He had a way of making me feel small in other ways too. If I was excited about something, he'd dismiss it with a bored, "That's nice." If I made a joke, he'd roll his eyes and say, "Not your best work." I told myself he just had a dry sense of humor, that he didn't mean to be hurtful. But deep down, I started second-guessing myself, carefully choosing my words to avoid his disapproval. Despite this, I still saw the good in him. He could be affectionate when he wanted to be, leaving sweet notes on my mirror or bringing me my favorite coffee. We had inside jokes, long conversations about our dreams, moments that made me believe we were solid. I clung to those glimpses of warmth, convincing myself that this was the real him, and everything else was just his way of pushing me to be better. So when Ryan unexpectedly invited me to a dinner with his coworkers, I was ecstatic. He always kept his work life separate, saying it was too boring for me to care about. But now he wanted me there. He wanted to introduce me to his colleagues, to share this side of his life with me. Felt like a milestone, proof that he was taking us seriously. I wanted to make the best possible impression. I spent extra time picking out my outfits, styling my hair, making sure everything was perfect. This night felt important, not just for him but for us. I had no idea that by the end of the evening, everything I thought I knew about our relationship would come crashing down. The invitation came out of nowhere. Ryan casually mentioned over breakfast that his company was hosting a dinner that weekend, and he wanted me to come. I almost dropped my coffee. He had never invited me to anything work-related before, always brushing it off as not a big deal. I tried to play it cool, but inside I was thrilled. Maybe this meant he was finally ready to fully integrate me into his life. I went all out preparing for that night. I bought a new dress, classy but not too flashy, got my hair done, and even treated myself to a professional makeup session. I wanted to make sure I looked perfect, to be someone he was proud to introduce. As I got ready, I imagined how the evening would go, how we'd laugh, how his colleagues would say he was lucky to have me. For the first time in a while, I actually felt excited about us. The moment we arrived, though, something felt off. Ryan barely acknowledged me, giving me a quick nod before diving into a conversation with his coworkers. No introduction, no small talk, nothing. I stood there awkwardly, clutching my purse, waiting for him to loop me in. When I finally tried to greet someone myself, Ryan placed a hand on my arm and muttered under his breath, "Not now." It was like I was an accessory, not his girlfriend. Then came the first blow. One of his colleagues, a woman named Sarah, complimented my dress. Before I could even say thank you, Ryan chuckled and said, "Yeah, she took forever picking that out. I told her to keep it simple, but you know how women are." The group laughed, and my stomach twisted. I had spent hours making sure I looked good for him, and now I was just some joke. I forced a smile, pretending it didn't sting. Dinner didn't get any better. Ryan seemed more interested in impressing his colleagues than in making me feel comfortable. Every time I tried to join the conversation, he either talked over me or subtly dismissed my input. At one point, when someone asked what I did for work, Ryan smirked and said, "She works in retail, so, she's great at folding shirts." The table erupted in laughter. My face burned, but I laughed along, too embarrassed to call him out. I kept telling myself it was just nerves, that maybe he was acting this way because he wanted to fit in. But deep down, a sick feeling was growing in my chest. Something was wrong. And by the time dessert was served, I realized that tonight wasn't about me meeting his colleagues. It was about something else entirely, something I wasn't prepared for. As the dinner went on, I started feeling more like an outsider than Ryan's girlfriend. He completely took over the conversation, making jokes, telling stories, and barely acknowledging my presence. Every time I tried to contribute, he either ignored me or cut me off mid-sentence. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe I just needed to find the right moment to jump in. But no matter what I said, it felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. The worst part was how his coworkers played along. No one seemed surprised by the way he spoke to me. If anything, they encouraged it. When I mentioned that I worked in retail, one of the guys smirked and said, "So, you give people their correct change? That's cute." Ryan laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah, she doesn't really get the business world, but she tries." I swallowed hard, my fingers gripping my napkin under the table. Then came the moment that made my stomach drop. Someone asked how we met, and I smiled, ready to tell the story. Before I could even start, Ryan waved his hand dismissively and said, "Oh, that? I was doing her a favor, really." My heart stopped. The table burst into laughter, and someone clapped him on the back. I stared at him, waiting for him to look at me, to give me some kind of sign that he was joking. He didn't. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice cracked. "Wow, I didn't realize I was a charity case." Ryan just smirked, taking a sip of his drink like nothing happened. The conversation moved on without me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just seen a version of him I was never meant to see. It wasn't just one bad joke or one mean comment. This was who he really was when he didn't have to pretend. The rest of the dinner was a blur. My appetite was gone, and all I wanted was to go home. But I kept sitting there, nodding and smiling at all the right moments, pretending everything was fine. The voice in my head kept repeating the same question over and over. Why am I here? And for the first time in 2 years, I didn't have an answer. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment alone. As soon as the door closed behind me, I pulled out my phone and texted Vanessa. Was I crazy, or was this as bad as it felt? I knew she'd tell me the truth. I just wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. I locked myself in the restroom, gripping the sink as I stared at my reflection. My makeup was still perfect, my dress still elegant, but I felt like a completely different person than the one who had walked in. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my phone and sent a quick message to Vanessa. Am I crazy, or is Ryan acting like a total asshole? I hesitated before pressing send, half expecting myself to delete it. Her reply came almost instantly. Finally, you see it. My stomach twisted. I knew Vanessa had always had reservations about Ryan, but she never pushed too hard. She was the one who introduced us, after all, and I think a part of her wanted to believe he was better than he was. But as I stood there rereading her message, I realized something gut-wrenching. She had warned me about him before. I just hadn't listened. Memories started flooding back. Little things I had brushed off, justified, or outright ignored. The way Ryan always had to be the smartest person in the room. The way he never apologized, always twisting arguments to make me feel like I was the unreasonable one. The times Vanessa would subtly change the subject whenever I gushed about him, as if she didn't want to be the one to burst my bubble. I suddenly felt sick. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about everything. The comments about my appearance, the way he dismissed my opinions, the subtle digs that chipped away at my confidence. He had been tearing me down for 2 years, and I had mistaken it for love. I thought I was being patient, understanding, a good girlfriend. But in reality, I had just been slowly losing myself. A wave of humiliation crashed over me. How had I let this happen? How had I been so blind? I wasn't just angry at Ryan. I was angry at myself for excusing his behavior for so long. But that anger burned in a way that felt different. It wasn't self-pity. It was clarity. And for the first time since this dinner started, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I took a deep breath, straightened my dress, and fixed my posture. I had come here tonight thinking I needed to impress Ryan and his colleagues, but now I realized something else entirely. I wasn't the one who should be proving anything. Ryan was, and he had just failed spectacularly. When I stepped out of the restroom, I felt different, lighter, sharper, awake. I walked back to the table, my head held high, no longer trying to shrink myself. Ryan barely glanced at me as I sat down, too wrapped up in whatever self-important story he was telling. But I didn't care anymore. I wasn't here for him, not anymore. I was here to see this night for what it truly was, the beginning of the end. Then, as if the universe wanted to make my decision even easier, Ryan delivered his final, crushing blow. One of his colleagues made a joke about relationships, something about trading up, and Ryan smirked before turning to me. Well, if you ask me, I did my charity work. Not everyone can date someone as ugly as her for this long. The table exploded into laughter. My ears rang, my face burned, and just like that I was done. The old me would have laughed along, pretended it was just a joke, and swallowed the humiliation like I always did. But not this time. I pushed my chair back, the screech of wood against tile cutting through their laughter. The room suddenly felt silent, like they could all sense the shift. I looked at Ryan, really looked at him, and all I saw was a pathetic little man, desperate for validation. "Wow," I said, my voice calm and steady. "You finally said it out loud." He blinked, caught off guard, but I didn't give him the chance to respond. I grabbed my purse, took a deep breath, and turned to the waiter. "Separate checks, please." "His is on him." Ryan's smirk faltered. "Wait, what?" he scoffed, as if the idea of me not accepting his cruelty was absurd. But I was already pulling out my card, handing it to the waiter with a polite smile. Ryan, in his arrogance, had assumed I would always stay. That I would always forgive, always find an excuse for him, always be the one making an effort. But he was wrong, because in that moment I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt free. As I walked away from the table, I could hear him calling after me, something about me being dramatic, but I didn't look back. I wasn't the one losing anything tonight. He was. I stepped outside, the cold air hitting my face like a reset button. My hands were still shaking, my pulse still racing, but I was smiling. Really smiling. And for the first time in a long time I felt like myself again. The next morning my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 13 missed calls. All from Ryan. I stared at the screen, half amused, half disgusted. This was the same guy who had humiliated me in front of his friends, who had mocked me like I was nothing. And now he suddenly had something to say. I let the calls go to voicemail. Whatever excuses he had, I wasn't interested. Then came the text. "Come on, don't be like this. You're overreacting. You embarrassed me last night." That last one made me laugh out loud. I had spent years twisting myself into knots trying to please him, trying to be enough. And the second I chose myself, he was the one feeling humiliated. The irony was almost poetic. Vanessa came over later that afternoon with coffee and zero "I told you so's," which I appreciated. Instead, she just sat with me, listened, and let me process everything. At one point, she pulled out her phone and grinned. "You're gonna love this." She turned the screen toward me, and there it was, Ryan's name blowing up in a group chat. Apparently, he had gone too far even for some of his coworkers, and word had spread fast. "He's getting dragged?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Vanessa nodded, biting back a laugh. "Oh, destroyed," she confirmed. "Apparently, Sarah, remember her? The one who complimented your dress. Called him out after you left. Said he was an insecure jerk who used you as a punching bag to make himself look bigger." Blink. I had spent so long thinking no one noticed, that I was just being too sensitive. But they had noticed. And now, Ryan was facing the consequences. I won't lie. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing his little performance had backfired. But more than that, I felt relief. I didn't need revenge or closure, or an apology that would never be sincere. I had something better. A clean break, a fresh start, and the undeniable proof that I was always worth more than the way he treated me. That night, I blocked his number, turned off my phone, and finally let myself breathe. Ryan might have spent years making me feel small, but the truth was, I had never been small at all. And for the first time in a long time I knew I was gonna be just fine.